It's been reported in the Telegraph that Japan and Fiji could join the Six Nations in November and December of this year, creating an 8-team competition where we'd see two pools of 4 sides. The winners of both pools would play a final, likely to be at Twickenham Stadium on the 5th of December. This is an idea that's been floated with quite a while, I feel, and it's been mentioned about Japan, especially after the Rugby World Cup that they had, that they should really be competing with sides around them, around level, and also teams that are going to push them ever so slightly. It's the same with Fiji. Fiji are probably the strongest of the 3 Pacific nations at the minute, and they also have been thrown into this idea of doing a tournament in November, December between the Six Nations sides, and also Fiji and Japan thrown in as well. What's in the comments down below? Are you a fan of this? Hear the whole video before you put your opinion, and then you'll know that little bit more. If you're new here, subscribe, free to do. We're trying to hit 500 subs, so your help is very much appreciated. Right, let's get into it. The first thing to talk about is, why is this happening? Why all of a sudden is this idea being mentioned? Well, obviously with COVID-19, many things have stopped. Of course, the summer tours were stopped. The Six Nations was postponed back in March as well. Wales against Scotland, one of the games I was looking forward to, but didn't happen. Now we have this story of Japan and Fiji joining the Six Nations. This would be really exciting in my opinion, but let's have a look at some statistics to see if these two teams are good enough to be at this level. What I've done is had a look at how each of these teams have done in the past against each Six Nations side to give you an idea of where they stack up, and there's some interesting findings to show, I believe, that these two teams could be competitive at this level to a certain extent. First of all, we'll start with the Japanese. We'll look at their record against each of the sides. Now, they've actually played against Wales the most out of any of the Six Nations sides. They played against Wales 10 times, getting 1 win back on the tour in 2013. The reality was Japan weren't as good as they are now back then, and Wales did field an extremely weakened side. But there's big support and fantastic reaction in Japan for that win. The last fixture between these two sides was back in 2016, so it has been a while, over 4 years now, pretty much, since these two sides have faced each other. But Japan have had a result in the last 10 years against Wales, and we've seen, obviously, from their experiences at Rugby World Cup 2019, one, the fans love rugby, so that's a good thing. You want the fans on board of that nation, but also that they are a decent side. Against the English, it's a little bit different. They've played 2 and lost 2. The last game was back in 2018. Japan actually gave England a scare in this game, but England came back and sorted their game out and got the results there. Against the French, they've played twice and they've lost 1, and they've drawn 1, and their recent game was back in 2019. The Irish then, they've played against the Irish 8 times. They've only won once, but they've also lost 7 times, so not the greatest record. But you do have to take into account, remember this guys, that a lot of these games were played a very long time ago, some in the 90s, and Japanese rugby has come on leaps and bounds since they lost against New Zealand in Rugby World Cup in 1999, I think it was, when they lost 154-0. Things have changed dramatically for Japanese rugby. Against the Italians, it's a little bit different. 6 games played, they've won 1, they've lost 5, but the most recent game in 2014, they came out on top in that one. So that's only 6 years ago. You think about Japanese rugby now, in my opinion, I think Japan are better than Italy. That's just my opinion, and I think recent results have certainly showed that. So I think they could certainly compete with the Italians. And finally, they've played against Scotland 8 times, won once, lost 7, 0 draws. The most recent game was back in 2019 in the Rugby World Cup, where of course they beat the Scots. So most recently, they've shown that they can beat a Six Nations side. Yes, Scotland were not on their best and were not performing incredibly, but it still shows that they can be competitive at this level. Let's move on now to the Fijians. How will the Fijians approach this? How do the Fijians compare against the Six Nations side? Well, in fact, they're probably more successful against Six Nations sides than the Japanese have. So against Wales, they played against Wales 12 times, won once. Don't remind me of a Welshman. 2007 Rugby World Cup, of course, lost 10. Most recent game was in the 2019 Rugby World Cup, where they did give Wales a scare, but Wales pulled away in the second half. Against the English, they played them 7 times and have lost 7 times. The most recent game back in 2016, they got hammered there, 58-15. Against the French, well, their most recent game was back in 2018 and they got their first win against the French and also in Paris. France was in a transition back then. It was a fantastic result for Fiji, but they have only won the one game out of those 10 and have lost 9. Against the Irish, it's 4 losses out of 4. Most recent game coming back in 2017. Against the Italians, it's very interesting. They played 6 and won 6. So very interesting right there. They've obviously lost the other 6, but they've played 6 and won 6, and most of them results have come in recent times, which shows that this Fijian side, and we've always said this, they've got the quality, they've got the skill, they've got the ability, but do they have the discipline? Do they have the game management? And if they can get a coach in place such as Vern Cotter, who they have now, can he really implement that? If he can, then this Fijian side could be a real force in the world. Against Scotland then, they play them 8 times and have a decent record. They've won 2, lost 6, which is a very respectable record, but the most recent game they did get hammered 54-17 up in Murrayfield. So what are my thoughts on this? I think as a short-term option for this year, I think it's a brilliant way of doing it. 1, engages fans across the world. Japan and Fiji, you get them guys involved. Again, you're not going to have them traditional teams coming up to play against you as you would in the Autumn Internationals because they've been cancelled. It's a great way of giving rugby fixed to Northern Hemisphere fans. It's what we love to see. It also gives something different because usually in the Six Nations you have the same 6 teams. It gives something a little bit different. It also, for Fiji and Japan, is fantastic options and opportunities for them to show what they can do on this stage. I believe Japan now need a plan after Rugby World Cup 2019. Probably, in my opinion, they should have joined the Rugby Championships, in my opinion, and because I think they are certainly on level with Argentina. Australia aren't great at the minute, so they can be got at. Fiji, on the other hand, have always been probably the strongest of the Pacific nations and shown that consistently, but they seem to be losing all their players to New Zealand, to the likes of Australia as well, and some even are heading over to Japan. So there needs to be a plan in place that these sides can have that continuity and have that ability to hopefully then compete with the top teams. But this will be a fantastic occasion as a one-off. I'm not a fan of this as a long-term project. I don't think it works. I think the beauty of the Six Nations, and maybe I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, is that the teams that are in it have that tradition. The idea of Georgia joining is more feasible, one, because that's a clear pathway between the European Second League and then the top league of European rugby. It makes sense for Georgia, for the team that wins that, to have a relegation game against whoever finished bottom of Six Nations and they get to go up, for example, but that's another story. It doesn't make sense for a team from the Southern Hemisphere or from ridiculously far away to really come into a tournament like this. There's talk of South Africa joining. I'm not the biggest fan of that either. I think it works the way that it is at the minute. But as always, I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on this story. It's just a one-off at the minute. It was reported in the Telegraph. I'll leave a link to 2 articles that I found reporting this story down in the description so you can check them out for yourself and have a think about it. And as always, hit that like button and subscribe. We're trying to hit 500 subs as soon as possible. So with your help, we certainly can do it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.